Welcome to episode 8, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at some box effects in CSS. So in my little HTML page here I have the basic model that we looked at a bunch of times linked up to my style sheet, and I have 3 paragraphs, one of which has the class of edit. This way you can see the difference between the one I'm editing and the ones that are the default settings here. So I'll go into my CSS and I'll call in the edit class, and the first thing we're going to start with is background color, and this is probably the easiest attribute you'll ever work with. You just call in background-color, and then you could type in one of these colors here, or you can use something like colorpicker.com to get a hexadecimal code. So I'll type in $DDD, which is the same thing as DDD because it repeats it, and that's going to give me a light gray background. You can see that right there. You can also apply this to the body tag. So if we want the entire window to have a background, we could say background color is red, and now you can see the entire window has a red color, and that'll stay even if I resize it. So now let's go on to background image, and this one is kind of easy too, but there's a lot of settings for it. So let's call that in, and now we have to start with URL, and then we're going to put 2 parentheses. Inside those parentheses we want to put a single quote or a double quote. It doesn't really matter. I like single quotes, and you're just going to type the source of an image. Now this is where relative roots comes into play again, because you can use this based off of where style.css is. So if I have an image in here, so if just say I dragged in a screenshot or something and I named this image .jpeg, now I could just say image.jpg, and then as we learned in the previous episodes, if this was in a folder called images, just say, then I would type images/image.jpg. It's the same deal as hooking up our style.css, but instead of the URL being relative to the HTML page, it's relative to the style sheet. So we'll get this image out of there, and I happen to know the URL of an image, so I'll type that in. And I'll actually make a very small image here. Now if we preview that, we can see that we get that background image, and it's repeating across the entire element. Now sometimes you don't want it to repeat, and that's okay. We have an attribute called background repeat, and as you can see here, you could set it to no repeat, which is obviously not going to repeat it at all. Repeat, which is just like we saw before, it's going to tile it. Repeat -x, which is just going to repeat it across the horizontal axis or the x-axis, and repeat y, which is going to repeat it off of the y-axis or the vertical axis. So I'm going to set this to no repeat. And you can see here, now we only have one of the image. But sometimes we don't even want it in this position. So you can see that by default, it aligns it to the top left of our element. So if we don't want that, we could say background position. And now there are 2 values that we enter here. One is the x and one is the y, or you could say one is the horizontal, one is the vertical. So for our x, we can enter pixels, we can enter percents, or words. So I'm going to type 20 pixels for now, and then I'll do the same for the y. Now if we look at this, that's not a good image. Yeah, there we go. So now 20 pixels from the left of the element, and 20 pixels from the top of the element is our background image right there. Again, we can use percents, so I'll use 20% and 50%. So it takes these percents based on the size of the element, really. So that's why we don't really see a major change on the vertical axis here. But if you had a huge image, then there would be a significant change. So as for words, you can see them right here. We have bottom, center, left, right, and top. So for going left to right, let's say center, and then let's just say top because it's a pretty short element here. So now you can see it's on the center and it's aligned to the top of the element, and that's pretty easy to use there. And that's pretty much it for the background. So just remember that this can also be applied to the body. So I'll get rid of these here. So we could say background image URL, type in the URL of an image, and if we preview that, we have an image here. Now, one more thing I should mention is that the background position attribute does not have to be applied only when there is no repeat on that image. So for example here, you could see that it is still aligned to the top left because that's where the first image is, and then it tiles off of that. But you don't have to do that. You could say background position, and we could say center, center. And now what that does is, it's kind of difficult to see here, but we have one main image in the center which is tiling off in all directions. I'll give you a better example here. So we can use center top, and now you can see that this image right here in the middle, I can't really highlight that for you, but this one here is on the top and it's in the center, and then the images are actually tiling around that. So you can see as I expand the window, that one image stays in place and then more images come out from the sides. And that's how you use background image. Now the next thing is borders. So I'm going to use my edit again, and the borders are relatively simple. So there's border dash left, dash right, dash top, and dash bottom. So I'll just start off by showing you border bottom. And now there are three values here. There are the size, the type, and the color. So for size, we can enter, pixels, points, percents, and words. And well, not words, not for border. But let's just say I type in 3 pixels. Now for type, we have, we have solid, we have ridge, groove, dotted, and dashed. The ones you'll probably be using the most are solid, dashed, and dotted. I'll use dashed for this example. And then color can be a word or a hexadecimal code. So I'll use 777. That should be a dark gray, I believe, or kind of a light gray, I don't know, in the middle. But you could see that we have that that border on the bottom of our element. If we apply it to the top, it's the same thing. There we go. Left and right works as well. And if just say you want the border to be the same across the entire element, we just call border without dash left, top, right, or bottom, just border. And now you can see it has an entire border of 3 pixels. Now let's go into margins and padding. And for this example, I'm going to apply a background color just so you can see a little bit easier, but in no way is background color required for margin or padding. So the first one is margin. So margin can be by itself, or like border, it has margin dash top, right, left, and bottom. So if I say margin bottom and enter 60 pixels, and we preview this, we see that this content is getting pushed down 60 pixels. And that's essentially what margin does. It pushes other content away from it. So if we say margin top, there's a gap here between this element and this element by 60 pixels. Now some elements, like the p tag, do have margins applied by default. And you'll see that because this element does have a slight margin bottom, even though I didn't specify a margin bottom in CSS. So if we want to completely get rid of margins, we can just type a 0. Now if we want the margin to be the same across every side of the element, we just type margin, and 30 pixels. And that's 30 pixels on every side, just like border was. And again, we could just type margin 0, and that gets rid of some of the margins here, but the other paragraph tags still do have margins, so that's the reason why you're still getting that gap there. So I'll go ahead and apply margin 0 to all paragraphs, and now they're right on top of each other. And the next thing is padding, and padding and margin are very, very different, but some people don't see that. So this is the same thing again. You can use padding by itself or bottom, left, right, top. I'll use bottom for this example, and I'll set it to 20 pixels. And you can see that instead of pushing other content away, what it's actually doing is pushing away the sides of the element. So it kind of gives more room for the text to breathe. And this works for any side again. So top, you can see that now there's a 20 pixel gap between the start of the element and where the text comes in. So we can use padding by itself, and this is used in a lot of elements just because by itself with no padding it's kind of difficult when there is a background or when there is a background image to really see the text. So paddings are great for just giving that, breathing room. And there's one more thing with padding and margins, and this might seem a little confusing, and I'll try to explain it the best that I can. So let's just say you have a unique value for all sides of your element. So you'll type that out like so. So we have margin top is 20 pixels, bottom, let's say 30 pixels. We'll set the right to 40 pixels and the left to 50 pixels. Now if we preview that, we get the example that we want, but it's kind of annoying to type out 4 different attributes here. So what we can do is call in the margin again, and instead of just typing one value, we can type 4, and that starts with the top and then works clockwise. So it goes from top to right to bottom to left, just like the hands on a clock, and we can just type those in. So for top it's 20 pixels, for right we had 40 pixels, for bottom we had 30 pixels, and for left we had 50 pixels. So now we can get rid of these 4 lines of code, and with just one line of code we have the exact same thing. Top is 20, right is 40, bottom is 30, left is 50. So you can play around with that if you like. The other thing is that there doesn't even need to be 4 of these attributes. It could be 2 or even 3. And the way that works is, let's say you just have 20 and 40 pixels. The browser doesn't know what to do for the other 2 sides, so it's going to kind of match it up with symmetry. So the value for top is going to be both the top and the bottom. The value for the right is going to be both the right and the left. So now if we preview this, it's 20 pixels on the top and on the bottom, and it's 40 pixels on the right and on the left. And that's really easy to use. And we can use the third one here. And so now we have the top of 20, the right of 40, the bottom of 30. And where does the left come in? Well, it's going to be 40 as well because, like I said, the right and the left are going to be the same. So now if we preview it, we see 20 pixels top, right is 40, bottom is 30, left is 40. The same thing is with padding. If we type that in there, you can see top is 20, the right and the left are 40, and the bottom is 30. Now, one thing I should also mention is how to actually experiment with this and make sure you're getting the right effect. In my browser here, I'm using Safari, which is great because there's a built-in feature for that. Chrome, I'm not sure, and I know Firefox has an add-on called Firefly, I believe it is. You can look that up and install it. But for Safari, if you go to Preferences and you go to Advanced, you can say Show Develop Menu in Menu Bar. And what that does is it allows you to right click or control click on an element and say inspect element. Now we have this nifty little web inspector here, and if we open up the metrics tab, we could see exactly what it has. So the padding, like I said, it's 20 pixels on top, 30 on bottom, 40 on left and right. This margin is just here again because it's the default property of a paragraph tag. Even though I didn't set it, it is still there. So that's pretty easy. And now let's go into width and height of an element. This is kind of easy. So we'll say width is 400 pixels, height is 200 pixels. And if we preview it, you can see that we get that box that exact same size. And the text is like water. It'll just match to whatever container it is. Now the problem comes when we have a relatively small content box. So if we say 200 pixels and 200 pixels, the text doesn't have any more room. So it's actually going into the next paragraph and it's just going to overlap whatever else is there. So to fix this, we use the overflow property. And this can be set to any of these things here. So if we say hidden, the content box is now just going to cut off whatever text doesn't fit. That's pretty easy. There's also scroll, and scroll is going to give us scroll bars on both the bottom side and the right side, or for both axi, whatever it is. And so even though the text can only be scrolled vertically here, it still is giving us that horizontal scroll bar just because that's what overflow scroll does. If we wanted to only display scroll bars where we need them, we set it to auto. And now you can see we only have that one scroll bar. The last one is visible, and visible does the exact same thing as the default. It's just cutting off the content. I'll set it back to hidden. And the last thing is position, and position is even more complicated, I think, but there are a bunch of things you can set it to right here. And if we set this to relative, relative is really good for just nudging an element a few pixels away, mostly just if you want to overlap something, because we do have margins to nudge, but margins can't put one element on top of another. So if just say we wanted this on top of the first paragraph, we could say top is -40 pixels. And you can see it just goes right on top there. It just moves it up 40 pixels. Everything else stays in place. And there are 4 attributes here: top, right, bottom, and left. You could just use whatever ones you want. Both negative and positive values are fine. So if I just had it 40 pixels, it would go down 40 pixels, and now it's sitting on top of this element. Now there are also absolute, and what absolute does is it is pretty much exact positioning on a page. So if we set this to top 30 pixels and left 30 pixels, now it's going to be exactly 30 pixels from the top and 30 pixels from the left. It will still scroll with any other content, so you could see it stays in place with 30 pixels from the top of the content, not from the window. Now fixed does something very similar, but the only change is in scrolling. So if we set this to fixed, and we go ahead and make this smaller so that we have a scroll bar, you can see that it stays in that exact same place no matter what. It will always stay there. If we can keep scrolling all day, it'll still be there. It aligns itself to the window rather than just the content. And as for position, that's pretty much it. Static is the default positioning here. So if we set it to static, that top, left, bottom, and right are going to do absolutely nothing because there's really no way to position it when it's just regular position. So you can see that does nothing. And that's it. So I hope this helped you just learn a lot about just some box effects, and you can go ahead and play around with these as much as you like. And actually I just thought of one more thing I want to show you, and that's in margin. what we can actually do is if we wanted to center something horizontally, that's easily done with margin. So we could say margin 0 auto, and what this does is just say on the top and bottom it has no margin. So we can even set this to 20 pixels if you do want a margin on your top or your bottom. That one doesn't really matter, but this auto one is going to give it as much margin as possible. So the left and the right sides are just keep pushing and pushing and pushing until it gets as much as it possibly can, and that's how you center something. So even if we scroll here, resize here, it still is centered. If we want to center something vertically on the page, that's not as easy. So I'll show you an example of that. So let's set this to position absolute. Well, we'll go fixed just to make sure it's always vertically centered. And you can see it already, the margins do nothing when you're on fixed or absolute positioning here. So basically what we have to do here is we have to first set it to left and top of 50%, and what that does is move it down and to the right for half of the window size. The only problem here is that the reason why it's so off right now is because it aligns the content box to wherever the top left is. So the central point is actually right here, and that's where the top left of that element is. So what we actually have to do is we have to move it back a little bit. So now we're going to say margin left is 100 pixels because that is half of what the width is. So that's moving the center of origin, negative 100 pixels. So that's moving the center of origin from the top left to the top middle. Now to move it more towards the center, we're going to say margin top is negative 100 pixels because that's half of what the height is. And that moved the center of origin started here. Now the origin is down and center here because we moved it back up negative 100 pixels this way and this way. If we scroll, it always stays in that centered position. So I know that was kind of confusing, but I hope you kind of got your mind around that one. And if you're kind of confused about anything, don't be afraid to just play around. Go right into CSS and just type in some random attributes and just see how they work together. And it can really help you, kind of learn a lot about the box effects and things like that. So in the next episode, I think we're actually going to be going into design, something like that. I'll have to check, and I hope you tune in for that one.